The transition wasn't marked by sirens or gunfire. It was the sound of a heavy door clicking shut in a wood-paneled room. The Patriarch didn't want the crown. He wanted the ledger. He understood something the old guard didn't. He understood that a nation's soul is expensive, but its infrastructure is a bargain. He began with the utilities. He took the water and the power, the very blood of the city, and converted them into private dividends. One by one, the public boards were replaced by cousins and loyalists. He called it modernization. He called it collection. By the time the public realized the walls were closing in, the walls were already his personal property. The state was now a family office, and the citizens were no longer voters. They were line items in a ledger. Everything was consolidated. But ownership is a heavy burden. He hadn't yet seen the first crack in the foundation. It was a decision not yet revealed. The consolidation was surgical. Telecommunications, energy, and land were systematically brought under a single family name. The name was everywhere, on the power bills, the data packets, and the deeds to the very earth beneath the capital. Public institutions were dismantled, their assets stripped and sold back to the family through offshore shells. The map was being redrawn in private boardrooms, where loyalty to the state was replaced by loyalty to the Patriarch's ledger. Every packet of data and every watt of power was now a royalty payment to the Patriarch's hidden accounts. The efficiency was beautiful, and the silence was absolute. No one complained when the trains ran on time for a price. But every consolidated asset carried a hidden debt, a systemic risk that the Patriarch kept off the books. He believed he had engineered the perfect system, but he had forgotten the one thing his ledger couldn't account for: a document not yet opened. The second generation inherited the web without understanding the spider that built it. They saw the wealth, but not the work. The foundational discipline of the Patriarch was replaced by a sense of divine right. They spent as if the ledger had no bottom. Vanity replaced strategy. The complex financial web was becoming too heavy for heirs who had never felt the weight of building it. The Patriarch's meetings were replaced by social functions. The strategic mind that built the dynasty was gone. High-velocity aesthetic spending became the new priority. Every cent was a brick pulled from the foundation of the sovereign core. In the shadows, the heirs began to carve up the empire for their own short-term gains, unaware of the structural decay. The ledger was no longer balanced. It was bleeding. The heirs were too busy admiring the veneer to notice the rot. The pride of the second generation was about to meet the reality of the Patriarch's debts, a call not yet answered. Infrastructure was abandoned. The money now flowed into vanity projects and high-velocity aesthetic spending. They built palaces instead of power grids. They bought yachts instead of securing the nation's energy future. Aggressive global PR campaigns were launched to mask the internal decay. They sold the world a dream while the reality was rotting. The nation became a stage set, a model state designed for global admiration while the basic services crumbled behind the scenes. The daughter believed her personal brand was the nation's strongest asset. She spent millions on a global identity project. But you can't build stability with PR. The veneer was starting to crack, and the world was beginning to notice. The cash was gone, replaced by debt-leveraged acquisitions that were now underwater. The vanity projects were now anchors. The first leaked memo reached the press. It wasn't about the money, it was about the lies, a realization that changes everything. The decay was internal. Early warning signs were masked by the glitz and the glamour of the PR blitz. Whispers in Swiss banks began to reach the creditors. The high-risk maneuvers had finally met their match. Debt-leveraged acquisitions that once looked brilliant were now anchors. The family was scrambling for a bailout. Private family debt became an unavoidable national liability. The Patriarch's legacy was now a public burden. Global creditors forced a confrontation. The family's desperation was becoming a matter of public record. The auctioning of national assets began, not to the highest bidder, but to the most dangerous adversaries. Basic services collapsed. The privatization of the privatization had failed. The human cost was now visible. The daughter signed the final agreement with a gold pen, unaware of the price. A decision not yet revealed. The liquidity crisis wasn't a single event. It was the slow realization that the family's assets were only worth what they could sell for. The first sign of the panic was at the ATMs. The trust that had been the foundation of the sovereign core was gone. The family began to sell everything. Not just the luxury, but the infrastructure. The nation was being stripped for parts. But the debt was a trap. Every sale only triggered more interest, more penalties. The family was running in place. Foreign adversaries arrived with short-term bailouts. They weren't there to help. They were there to claim their prize. Internal resistance was growing. The PR campaigns couldn't mask the lack of basic services any longer. The city was on edge. The Patriarch's ledger was being destroyed, not by enemies, but by the family's own desperation. The history was being erased. In the middle of the crisis, a guest arrived at the family estate. Someone the Patriarch thought was long gone. A document not yet opened. The moment arrived when private family debt became an unavoidable national liability. The nation was now responsible for the name. The treasury was empty. Every cent of public money had been pledged to cover the family's losses. The state was bankrupt. The creditors' demands were absolute. They didn't want the money. They wanted the land, the ports, the very sovereignty of the nation. The final confrontation began. The family was forced to face the people they had once considered line items. The reality was brutal. The systemic failure was complete. The institutions that were supposed to protect the nation were now its biggest threats. The daughter had a choice. She could save the brand, or she could save the stability. She chose the brand. Every action has a cost. Regional powers exploited the desperation. They redrew the map while the family scrambled for a short-term bailout. The cost was irreversible. A hidden truth was about to be revealed. Something the Patriarch had kept in a private ledger for 30 years. A call not yet answered. Personal branding was the daughter's priority. She spent millions on an image while the system was failing. The brand was the shield. She believed that if she was loved, the family would be safe. She confused admiration with loyalty, a fatal mistake in the global economy. Leaked communications showed the true priority. She was worried about the lighting while the national asset auction was beginning. Systemic stability was traded for social media metrics. The foundation was being sacrificed for the veneer. The world was watching. The Global Identity Project was a success, but the nation was a failure. The brand was now a target for every adversary. The PR blitz failed to mask the reality. The world saw the daughter's vanity as a blueprint for the family's bankruptcy. The cost was high. The final post was sent from a private island while the basic services collapsed. The disconnect was complete. The brand was dead. A leaked document revealed the daughter's true intent. It wasn't about the nation, it was about the exit strategy. A document not yet opened. The auction was chaotic. National assets were sold to foreign adversaries as the family scrambled for a short-term bailout. The end was near. Ports, power grids, and mines, everything that was public was now being sold to the highest, most dangerous bidder. The family was gone. Foreign adversaries claimed their prizes. They didn't want the money, they wanted the influence. The map was being redrawn. The bailout was a lie. It was a stay of execution, bought with the nation's future. The family was trading years for minutes. The asset stripping was complete. The sovereign core was now a shell, its value drained into the Patriarch's ledger. The end was inevitable. The scramble for an exit began. The family was leaving, but the debt remained. The nation was left with the bill and no assets. The last port was sold. The nation was now a tenant in its own land. The privatization of the privatization was complete. The cost was total. The final agreement was signed. It wasn't a bailout, it was a surrender. A decision not yet revealed. A silent reaction with unclear meaning. The human cost was visible. Basic services collapsed following the privatization of the privatization. The tragedy was systemic. No one came when the lights went out. The power grid that was once a public asset was now a private failure. The people were left in the dark. The water was gone, sold to a foreign entity to cover the family's debt. The basic needs were now luxury items. The cost was survival. The systemic collapse was complete. The trust was gone, replaced by a desperate need for the basics. The nation was on the brink. The family left at night. They had their exit strategy, bought with the suffering of the millions they had once called line items. The end was here. The aftermath was a silent city. No power, no water, no future. The Patriarch's ledger was finally closed. and the balance was zero. The system absorbs the damage and continues, but the cost remains. At least one character is permanently diminished. The truth is unresolved. The deeper system remains unchanged, waiting for the next patriarch, a realization that changes everything, a call not yet answered. Regional powers exploited the desperation to redraw map lines and influence domestic policy. The nation was a pawn. New borders were drawn in back rooms. The land that was once a national asset was now a bargaining chip for regional dominance. Domestic policy was influenced by those who held the family's debt. The sovereignty was a memory, replaced by regional interests. The nation was a pawn in a larger game. The family's greed had opened the door for every adversary to claim their piece of the pie. The influence was total. Every decision was vetted by those who had bought the nation's future for a short-term bailout. The end was total. They redrew the map while the family was arguing over PR metrics. The nation was gone, replaced by a regional asset. The cost was final. The desperation was exploited. The family's exit was bought with the nation's soul. The regional powers were the only winners. The final move was made, an irreversible move that would change the region forever. A document not yet opened, a call not yet answered. The final collapse was inevitable. It was a cautionary tale about the instability of dynastic rule in a modern global economy. Dynastic rule is a blueprint for bankruptcy. The concentration of power within a single ego always ends in the same way. The end. Compare the nation at its peak to its current state. The total erosion of value is the true legacy of the patriarch's ledger. The cost is total. The patriarch's ego was the blueprint for the bankruptcy. He thought he was the nation, but he was only its greatest liability. The end. The revenge execution lands with irreversible consequences. The damage spreads beyond the original target. The truth is clear. The end. The system absorbs the damage and continues, but at least one character is permanently altered. The unresolved truth remains. The end. The final line reframes the entire story as inevitable. Why the concentration of state power within a single ego is a blueprint for bankruptcy. It was always going to end this way. The ledger is closed.